What's going on, everybody? I am back from the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. I had a fantastic time, man. Getting to talk with a lot of my favorite prospects. Meeting up with some really good people. I had some really good food as well. Indy's food was fire, man. But we got a lot to talk about today. We're gonna spend some time talking through just some of our winners from the event. We're gonna go through some interview stuff. We're also going to go through just some guys that knocked it out the park with their testing, their on-field performances. And then we're just going to kind of roll through some like of the confirmed formal visits with the Steelers who kind of piqued our interest. Maybe not all like big name guys that we expected them to meet with, but some, prospects that, cause us to kind of raise our eyebrows a little bit that we liked. So, Nick, busy week for me. How was your week, brother?
So not as busy as yours because you're having to run around everywhere. You're networking with a ton of people, whether
Yeah.
it be like people in this media field or just people you know that are participating in the combine. But I get a lot of this week every single time, even though I've never been to the combine, because you get to see all like how players answer questions. You get to see them move around in positional drills, how their hips look in these sorts of things, and we're going to kind of elaborate on some of the stuff we look at. But like I got so much out of this week just being able to watch a lot of these guys, and I have a really good box for like certain guys that I'm looking forward to either going back to watching the film or eager to check out for the first time.
Absolutely, man. Just before we dive into things, if you guys could just hit that like button, make sure you're subscribed, hit the bell for me as well. Drop me a comment. I'm curious as to who impressed you all the most during the combine. Also, if you have any questions for us, drop those below. We'll get to them. We're gonna about to get into a really, really busy couple weeks for the Steelers and for the NFL draft. So there's gonna be a ton of content coming on the channel for sure. Just real quick, I wanted to talk just about like what matters from the NFL Combine, and one of the reasons why I wanted to like make this channel for myself independently, and I really appreciate like you coming on to it, like doing the pod with me. It's been a lot of fun. But one of the reasons I wanted to do this is because I had like free reign on what I talked about and like my content that I was dropping. I really enjoy being able to like peel back the curtain in terms of my scouting process. I can like talk about what I want and go into the weeds kind of whenever I want to. And this is like one of those times where I really want to do that because I got a really good question in my DMs about asking me like how much stock I put into the testing of the combine and like what to pay attention to. And I kind of wanted to talk about that before we actually talk about any of these players because I know there's a lot of people like you and myself that have been watching the combine for years and years, but it's like it is a form of entertainment, but it's also like if you're trying to get into the evaluation space or like you're trying to make your own big boards at home or like what should you be paying attention to and what is like more so noise or how much to like factor these things into your grades. So I'm not sure if you have anything to like add on that or not, but I have a bunch of kind of notes for this, but I think it's really my long-winded rant on this, which I did want to type out via Twitter. But I think it's important to understand that like interviews, medicals, 1A, 1B, right? In terms of like what matters for teams. Like that's why everybody's in one central location. Indianapolis, why it's held there is because there's a ton of hospitals around to help get these guys, situated. But that's not to say that the testing doesn't matter. Of course, it matters a ton. NFL top league, we got a ton of great athletes around, but there's necessary context. I feel like you have to take into account, like as an evaluator, it's important to not count things twice. I know that's something like you and I talk a lot about on social media. It is so very true. Like for example, South Carolina's defensive back Nick Emanwari lit it up, man. One of the most impressive, like, workouts that we've seen in quite a while. For those of you guys on Twitter, you've probably seen like the RAS score boxes and stuff, relative athletic score. It's a great like metric to look at people from. He basically compiles everything, grades them 1 to 10 based on how they scored at their particular weight that they weighed in at. And he got a perfect 10. It was like one of the most athletic performances we've ever seen, right? So it's awesome to watch, and I think it was definitely cool. It was historic and everything, but it basically just like confirmed my evaluation because we already knew that he was a great athlete. Before the combine, I literally wrote about Eamon Worry as like one of the guys that could blow it up, and the Steelers could catch like the Steelers' interest because he is a guy that plays inside the slot. So that's awesome that he did that, but it doesn't necessarily like change my grade for him. You know what I'm saying? And then
Yeah.
like I think on the flip side of that is a guy like Tyler Booker, right? Like he doesn't look like a great athlete on film, but he dominates in a phone booth. Like he's got this impenetrable anchor, strong hands. He's a mauler in the run game, right? Especially when it comes to like gap scheme stuff. He scored a 4.15 RAS. I think the Math Bomb cat, he tweeted this out and was like, we haven't had a player under 5 go in the first round in several years. So it does make him a little bit of an outlier. Small caveat there, bad athletes typically don't test. So like that is something to keep in mind. Like when you're at home is like, why is this guy not doing this particular drill? Why is this guy not running the 40? Get those wheels turning to see like why they may be like skipping out on that portion of the drills. But it does lead to kind of just like my last point too, is that you don't want to bet on too many outliers in each class. So pick and choose your spots on players that you're really passionate about. A really good kind of tidbit of advice I got from a scout years and years ago was you want to grade with conviction. So like if you feel really confident about a player, like put a grade on them, even if other players or the people, other evaluators in the mainstream world may not agree with you. But you got to pick your spots when it comes to like athletes that test poorly, historically small players for their respective positions, or guys just like without any sort of production, right, coming into the league. So I'm just kind of curious on like what you have there, like what your process is when you're like paying attention to the event.
So just going into the whole like amount of like testing that goes on, especially like some of these drills, I try to look a lot for how does a player look moving? Are they fluid in and out of their movements? Are they able to open up their hips with ease? You see a lot of it with the defensive backs in their positional drills. You get to see them turn their hips consistently, see how fast they gain depth. For instance, Malachi Starks, he only ran like a 4.5 flat, but he was moving faster in positional drills than just about anyone else. And he was gaining depth, he was gaining width faster because he was able to turn his hips and gain that ground is faster than a lot of other players. So a lot of that stuff matters to me. I
That's a great
also,
example. I don't want to
yeah,
cut you off, but that is a great
all good.
example about like people are going to freak out because he had like a 7 on the RAS and like he didn't run as fast as like E-Man Worry did. And I will be full disclosure, like I don't think his film from this past season was as good as the year prior. We talked about that.
Mhm.
He was playing more in the nickel. I think he's more of a free safety. Having said that, if you just want to look at like what it's supposed to look like in the wave drill and the Tara Austin drill and stuff like that, Malachi Starks, like, go look at that tape. Like, that's how you want defensive backs to move at the next level. So, perfect example from you, just in terms of like comparing guys that maybe didn't test the way that some people thought that they would, and also like what they actually look like on the field. Continue.
Yep, exactly. And we also talk about, testing speed versus game speed. For
Hmm.
instance, I've looked at a couple of, there's a couple of notorious examples in the past, you know, like decades or so that we've been doing this, but like you go and look at like Derrick Henry, he ran like a 4.54 40, but he's like one of the fastest players on the field consistently. He's consistently measuring out to like high GPS speeds, like over like 21 miles an hour on next gen stats like throughout like the season. And then you'll have guys like Puka Nakua who ran like a 4.58, but he went like super fast in like the gauntlet drill back, back when he was at the combine. There's a lot of things you can take away from this sort of thing. And honestly, with how next gen stats with how like GPS times are becoming more and more mainstream, I do think
Hmm.
the combine is losing a lot of luster in terms of just measuring straight line speed because I do think we saw a lot of flaws o- during the combine just on how it can lead to misconceptions. Like Travion Henderson and DJ Giddens, they had very similar 40 times, but they are not the same type of like
Right.
straight line like angle erasing athletes on the field. That doesn't mean they're that doesn't mean that one's a bad athlete and one's a good athlete. No, it just means that sometimes guys are just faster in pads than others. And it doesn't necessarily mean that DJ Giddens isn't fast. It's just he's might not just be as fast as how he
Yep.
tested in that particular moment. And also to go into like a few other things like measurements and stuff like that. I still think this is one of the most important parts about the combine because I look
100%.
a lot at certain thresholds. For offensive tackle, 33-inch arms is my cutoff. 80-inch wingspan, that's my cutoff.
It's
Will
34 for a lot of NFL teams.
I
Yeah,
understand
you're
that.
right.
I
33
definitely
is a good cutoff.
yeah, I think 33 is like my minimum, and that's
Yeah.
just where I cut it off. Will Campbell came in. He had like 32-inch arms, but he had like a 77 and like 1/3 wingspan, which is like extreme outlier territory. And you can kind of get a feel just watching these players like running the drills. I like noted his arms and I was like, oh my God, they don't really reach down all that far.
Yeah.
Like you can see those types of things. And not just that, you look for like thresholds, like even like speed. Like for instance, while testing speed is not always a great indicator. You don't want like an athlete at wide receiver per se or running back to run like a 4.7 or above. It
Hmm.
typically puts them in outlier territory. So for me, I was looking at a player like, let's say, Taj Brooks. I wanted him to clear the 4.6 threshold. He ended up clearing it for me. So it gave me alleviation on that sort of
Yep.
feeling about how I can feel about him as a prospect going forward on his ceiling and those types of things. Jackson Hawes was a player I didn't really have a feel for based off his sample size with speed as a route runner. He only ran like in the 4.8s, but that's, I got like that threshold met with those types of
Yep.
players, and that's what I care about the most is meeting those thresholds and seeing those minimums be meet. The boxes just getting checked, that's what helps. And then when something doesn't match up that you didn't see on film, it forces you to go back. And when a guy forces you to go back to their film, that means they did something right going
Yep.
into the week. And that's what I really appreciate about this process.
And I think too, like the big thing is like making sure if a player, for example, if you have speed concerns about a particular player and then they go test really fast, I think it's important to go back to the tape with an open mind and say, like, okay,
Mhm.
like he did this in shorts. Does it actually translate to the field? And then going back and trying to find like one of the things I like to do is like, okay, what games have I already watched from this player? Can I go watch other games, maybe against like high caliber athletes that I can maybe showcase his speed better? I will say though, there's a bunch of corners that ran really fast this past weekend and that I maybe had some speed concerns about. And they're just getting beat all the time deep. So
Yeah.
I don't. That's the thing is, testing. It's a good measurement and it absolutely matters, but it only matters if you can do it in pads.
There are certain positions that matter more, in my honest opinion. Like edge
Correct.
rusher is the big one. Like
Number
I
one,
look for vertical, broad jump, all those. The
three
10-yard
cone.
split is way more important than the
Hmm.
40-yard. And then you mentioned the three cone, the shuttle. That's where you get to see their short area quickness. Can they be? Are they laterally adept at like being able to disengage from blocks, but also avoid those blocks? And can they bend? Like the three cone drill kind of showcases a little bit of that ability to bend. Doesn't always match with a bunch of players, but it typically has a really good track record for,
Yep.
guys who tend to translate. And, we talk about the shuttle drill for offensive linemen. Josh Norris did a study. I think it was the threshold is 4.47 in the short
Yep.
shuttle. And he found like a study that like basically indicates that like a lot of these guys tend to go on to start at some point in their careers.
Didn't
So
have
it was
anybody hit it though this year.
no one hit it. Caleb Rogers was close. He was a
Yeah.
4.49
Yeah.
out
No,
of
it's a
Texas.
good point. Yeah, I mean, like that, like you, it's a good point about the testing mattering. Like I always say, like corner is a stopwatch position. Like it is like if you are extremely refined technically, you can get by with just like checking the box, right? But it's a position where speed absolutely matters because you're having it's a reactive position. You're backpedaling, you're having to react to different movements. It just the testing matters a lot there. Whereas like I have found personally where like I don't care as I'm not saying I don't care at all, but like I don't care as much about the testing for positions like running back,
Yeah.
positions like even like safety to me, I feel like we've got proof of concept guys that have gone on in the league, a lot of the top players like from the last like 5-10 years that haven't necessarily tested out the wazoo. So it's like for me, those positions matter a little bit less. Speaking of like running backs though, like one of the tidbits that I wanted to talk about Steelers related before we dive into like kind of our winners is just lot of stuff in Indy about, there's you all saw like all the formal visits that they had with this running back class. Nick has been ahead of the curve on this running back class, really dating back since last summer. You guys know that I'm a big fan as well. The Steelers are taking a running back 100%. So there's some stuff out there that like they may be willing to bring back Najee Harris. It ain't happening, man. Like I've been reading the tea leaves since last summer and said that I'll be really surprised. I've never been more confident that he's not going to be back. So I don't know how that will make like people listen to this podcast like feel, but that's just the vibe that I got while I was in Indy. So speaking of, kind of just like interviews though, I really enjoy like being able to go to the podiums, get a feel for like how these guys conduct themselves professionally. It's something that I really enjoy. I think there's something to be learned from, even from a media side, from us. Usually the teams get like 15, 20 minutes or whatever with each of these players. But, getting to know them as players, but also as like people, the gift of social media is that everybody's like recording. So all these snippets of notable answers end up online, which kind of helps people that aren't able to get to the combine. But I wanted to get perspective on maybe some answers that you liked in particular. We can kind of alternate. I think I have three, you have two that you wanted to go to. So I'll kind of start with mine. Best interview of the entire week for me was Texas cornerback Jahdae Barron. He was just fantastic, man. Got a lot of questions about moving around at Texas, just playing all over the defense. He talked about this quote he wrote on his mirror, man, and I thought it was fantastic. It was I wrote it down. Can I be committed to the process without being emotionally attached to the result? And I just thought that is like such a good outlook on football, but also like life in general. And it was just all the different things
Exactly.
that he's done while he was in college. He's a 50 guy who's got a ton of playing time. He's did every single thing that you could want in a defender, right? Like he played outside corner this past year. He's got snaps as a dime backer, literally in the box, off the edge, in the slot, deep safety, box safety. He's done a little bit of everything. And I like guys that are like that as long as they have like a natural home at the next level. Like it's good to be versatile, but you got to have a home. Barron's home for me is in the nickel at the next level. And I think when
Agree.
you look at around the NFL about guys who have really been transformative pieces for their respective units, like a Brian Branch, a Kyle Hamilton, guys like that have kind of came in and Cooper DeJean from last year have really came into that nickel spot and turned their defenses around, not single-handedly, but been a huge boon in that. And I just think Barron, like listening to him talk, man, like I know he's 24 years old. He tested very well, ran a 4.4. That was a time that was definitely better than I expected too. But I think this kid probably knocked it out of the park with team interviews. And I think he's going to go like first round guaranteed, but probably like top 20 ish now, I would guess. But who was somebody what was an answer that you liked?
So I kind of kept it a little bit short. I was
Mm-hmm.
looking, for some quotes that really stood out. And, we talked about how Tyler Booker is a guy who is a mauler in the trenches. Like he wants
Oh,
to
yeah.
absolutely impose his will. And I just love what he said. The thing I love most about football is taking the love away from other people. And it just struck me as an
I love
offensive
that.
lineman. Like I was like, all right, yeah, that's exactly what I want to see. Like, everyone likes seeing like the pass rush wins, they like seeing the swims. He wants to just bury those guys into the ground. He doesn't want you to have your fun. He wants to have the offense running on a well-oiled machine and be like the foundation of that. And I just really like that answer, just being like that physical imposing will. And every single team
Yeah.
needs a player like that on the offensive line. So I really like that answer from Booker. I thought that really stood out for me, honestly.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what you want to hear from your offensive lineman, right? Like I was literally saying last night that I want to put my big board. I'm going to start rolling out some positional rankings, like even further than the top fives we're going to do on the podcast. But I want to get my big board out earlier this year. But it's just like I'm frantically playing catch up on the offensive lineman and the inside linebackers, just positions that I don't anticipate. Like Pittsburgh really prioritizing heavily in the
Yeah.
draft. But I got to Booker's film like while I was in Indy, and it was just like, this is unbelievable. Just an absolutely mountain of a man. Another guy that I got to speak with quite a bit, honestly, was Io Manor. Dude, just a really impressive guy, man. Like he was asked so many questions like at the beginning of his podium scrum about like that 290 something 3 touchdown performance against Travis Hunter in Colorado. I mean, people just kept asking it in different ways, and he just refused to take any sort of credit for that performance. And it was like, dude, this is what got you hype around summer scouting, man. Like this is what got us out of our seats. Like I remember literally where I was, what I was eating, and what I was doing when I was watching that game because I could not believe what he was doing to this like certified like generational prospect. But he just kept giving credit to his teammates. He was like, yeah, the offensive line did a great job like holding up in pass protection. My quarterback had delivering the football, and it was like I'm just going out there and trying to do what I can for the team. And I was just like, this is great. And then like every time they kept asking him about like his skill set, what he brings to the NFL, and he's like, I just love to block. Like you just know what you're gonna get. Like I love to like I'm gonna come off hard every single play off the line of scrimmage, like burst, try to do everything I can to help my teammates. And then like somebody was able to ask him a question at the very end about his like favorite play at Stanford in the 2 years he was there, and he was like, I would probably say like this double pancake block against Louisville in the end zone. We were running duo, and I literally went back and clipped it, and like he really did. He took two people's soul at the goal line, and it was like we were running duo, and I had this double pancake block, put two guys on their back. It was probably my favorite play, and I just this dude's like a selfless dude, like by far, in my opinion, the best blocking wide receiver in the class. Like it is every single play. And he mentioned like I thought too, like it was one of the cooler answers too about like guys that he like kind of models his game after. And another Stanford guy, Michael Wilson, came out a couple years ago, but he was like, basically saying like this dude kind of taught me like how to play the right way, like his tenacity. He mentioned AJ Brown's physicality. I think we all kind of remember who AJ Brown played under in Tennessee. Hint, hint. Had a formal visit with the Steelers, which is kind of cool, but just repeatedly, even like he was talking about like the burst off the ball, which is something I noted in my scouting report, is like that he really does, like he plays at a good speed, he plays at a good pace. And he said like he watches Calvin Ridley just to see like how he can kind of vertically press cornerbacks off the ball. So really impressive interview. I think like someone that is squarely in contention for the Steelers on day 2. I just think he makes a ton of sense. But yeah, I like the film. I've always liked the player. I know the situation at Stanford wasn't always great in terms of like the environment, but yeah, really impressive guy. I think he probably killed his interviews with teams. You have anybody else you want to shout out?
Real quick, I just want to add, I hadn't actually seen Iomonder's interview at all, and I was like really interested in those answers because like I was like, oh, most impressive play. There was that circus catch he made against Syracuse. Nah,
Tons of them.
let's talk,
Yeah.
let's talk about the duo block.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, I mean, if you guys want to, like, I did a full profile. It's like 1,500 words on Steelers Now that has a bunch of other answers and stuff from like my conversation with him, and as always, like other questions that were at his podium scrum. And then I kind of wrote him up as a player. There's some strengths, weaknesses stuff. So like the link to all of my written work's always in the description of these videos. So if you guys want to go look at what I'm writing about, you guys can go check that out as well. But you have any other podium you liked?
So for me, I was kind of like looking at like who could kind of stand out as like a person and in some of these podium answers. Some guys like they come off, they show their love for the game, but some like kind of show that they could be like huge presences in the community. And I kind of like liked what Dylan Sampson said. This is from Daniel Harms. This was where I found the quote.
Mm-hmm.
Does great work over at the Draft Network. Definitely would follow, by the way. If you're living your life right off the field, everything will come to you on the field. Like he's very focused on building up the community, people around him, leaving a place better than he found it. And I just think that's such a great mindset to have. And those are the type of teammates, the type of players, every type of people that every single team needs on their squad. Like the Steelers have Alex Highsmith in that regard. They have Cam Hayward.
Mm-hmm.
Dylan Sampson is that type of like player that like the moment he gets in the locker room, he is going to energize a community and really, bring people together. And I think that's something, we kind of overlook a little bit with some of these players, but you need those type of guys that like can truly like build up the community. And I really liked hearing that from Dylan Sampson. So that was a really impressive interview in my regards, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the thing too. Like we mentioned at the top, right? The medicals and the interviews, those things, like those are 1A, 1B, right? So you got to make sure that you're, acing those tests. And I wasn't at Samson's podium, but that's pretty cool to hear. The last guy that I wasn't at his podium for the entirety of this one, and for like full context, like the way this kind of works is like they roll out about like 12 players at a time. So obviously I can't be everywhere at once. So if a player isn't on this list, it doesn't mean they had a bad podium session. It just means that I wasn't over there. But Jalen Milroe, unsurprisingly, was the guy that really shined in this regard. I thought he showed a lot of maturity at the podium. He took accountability for maybe not being as consistent as he wanted after he came back to Alabama last year, especially like the good start that he got off to. Kind of things went off the rails a little bit, but just kept coming back to like how much he loves football, the amount of work that's necessary leading up to the game, like his preparation, all that stuff, and just how he was able to communicate. With these teams, a lot of the meetings with the teams, like you'll get little tidbits from players. For example, like when players meet with the Steelers, a lot of times it's they just wanted to bring me in and like get to know me as a person. Like Mike Tomlin talked to me about like different things, right? other teams, they'll put you on the board, like see if you can recall plays, like draw things up from your system. They'll introduce you to plays from their own system, right? Like see if you can recall it, see if you can teach it. It's a big part of the quarterback position as well. But I just thought that like he did really well explaining like the board work stuff, and also acknowledging that he's got to continue to get better. Like he used the quote that he didn't want to be one dimensional at the next level, and I think that that's the big thing with Milroe is like you want to see him continue to develop as a passer. I just sensed a lot of humility with the way that he spoke, and I know like the character stuff out of Alabama was fantastic. Everybody speaks glowingly about this dude as a teammate, even people from inside that organization. But I thought on Saturday too, like as we kind of transition here to like the winners of the event, right? I thought on Saturday he looked much more in sync as a passer. You saw the lower body be like much more fluid. He's been working with Jordan Palmer, kind of QB expert. I've had the chance to like meet with Jordan a couple times at various pro days, and like Jordan knows his stuff. So I know that he can really be a good asset for you. But I don't want to read too much in like routes on air. But I thought him, Tyler Shuck, who was also another good interview. Had a good conversation with him, and then I thought Jackson Dart were the three most consistent guys, kind of in that order in the throwing session. So it was good to see him like take a step forward. You could tell at the Senior Bowl he was working some kinks out and like kind of trying to overhaul some stuff, which led to a underwhelming performance to say the least. But I thought those guys kind of continued to show well in that regard. So without, do you have anything on Milroe that you wanted to bring up, or you want to roll into the winners?
I was gonna say like during like Senior Bowl week and stuff that I was
you were there for that, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was not there for Senior
Oh,
Bowl.
okay.
I did watch it intently though, but he was consistently like waiting on guys. Like it looked like he was thinking about his mechanics first before he was ever even trying to make the throw. And he was doing a little bit of that during the combine week, but he was able to hit guys on time much more consistently, which I think shows his growth in a short amount of time, just working with Palmer. Like you mentioned, like that's huge. You want to see that mechanical improvement, that ability to like have it become second nature as opposed, not having to think as much. So I really think Milroe has a great mindset, like you said, and the fact that he's taking the proper work to work on those things, it's definitely very encouraging about his future prospects for sure.
Yeah, for sure, man. I can't stress that enough. Let's get into the winners. I think I have like 3 or 4. I think that's probably the amount that you've got as well. I think the number one like story from the weekend, just in terms of impressive guys, maybe showing some things we didn't necessarily see coming. Matthew Golden, Texas wide receiver, #brand, 4.29 40-yard dash.
I did not expect that.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that this dude was. I mean, I really liked his game. I've done a film room on the channel for him, for the channel members. But I thought he had, good speed. I mean, he was a guy that made a lot of plays down the field. I didn't think he had jets like that. But I just think that the route running, his work against press really improved at Texas, man. I actually like after he ran that, I wanted to go back and watch some Houston film.
That's what I was about to do too, as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I went back and watched the Houston game. So Houston played Texas 2 years ago. And I guess that's why Texas was so interested in him in the portal, because he had like over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he wasn't even playing every snap. I don't know. I mean, Houston had Sam Brown, who went to Miami, another player that's in this class. But I'm just trying to figure out, like, why are we not getting this dude the ball more than we're getting him the ball? He's open every play. But I just think, like, you can even watch him run routes at Houston and then turn on the film from this year. Dude, he improved so much as a route runner. And I like look at that, like I get really excited because this dude's an underclassman. He's only like 21. I think he'll be 21 through a portion of his rookie season, if I remember correctly. So I'm just like, dude, this dude is still like very early on the runway of his development. And I just think, his ability to snap at the break point, that's a true weapon, man. And I think there's some fantastic catches away from his frame. Actually, I wish the combine production team, I love Daniel Jeremiah, dude. Like I really do. I've been reading DJ stuff literally since he got out of the scouting realm and came to NFL Network. I wish they got a little bit more into the weeds and like catered more to the diehard fan instead of like doing some of the just nonsense that NFL Network was doing with their production stuff.
Very unfunny.
David Spade. Why is David Spade in the booth?
They had David Spade in the booth, but then they had like this one guy who was like doing imitations. It was like the Frank like when the meme where it's like Frank Kelly, or it was like we have him at home, the Frank Caliendo at home, and that's how I felt listening to that.
Oh my god, it was brutal. But anyway, back to Matthew Golden. Yeah, I mean, I think that DJ did a good job, like in his like highlight video, like highlighting the things that go. I think Golden makes Golden really a really intriguing option in this class without a lot of like, this receiver group is not the best, right? Especially because we got spoiled from last year. But it's really funny. We did our first podcast on here in January, and I went back to like look at my notes about like what I said about Golden in that video. And the last thing I think I had in my notes for that podcast is that I left his film thinking that he might end up being the best pro of this entire class. So I don't think listeners to like this pod or people that have followed me on Twitter, like, all that stuff are going to be surprised where I have him ranked episode. We're going to be ranking receivers really soon. But I'm a really big fan of Matthew Golden, even if I don't quite see the 4.3 speed on tape. I just think that, it was an impressive performance, the fact that he ran like that.
Definitely. Matthew Golden was a good shout. Like I really did not think he had 4.29 in the calling cards at all.
Yeah,
Honestly, like the stop start stuff, I was hoping like a 4
fantastic.
I was hoping like a 4.4 flat was going to be what he ended up running. He
Yep.
ends up running that. And I was like, "Oh wow." So we got the ball tracking, we got solid hands, and we got game breaking speed all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Might change a little bit of the perception about him.
Oh, yeah,
Um
it's coming.
yeah, for a winner for me, I was kind of going with like an all-around performance, a guy who really checked boxes. I have really dove into this player's game a lot. Taj Brooks out of Texas Tech, my bad.
Hmm.
Um he ended up measuring in at 214. He dropped like over 15 pounds of weight. He was like a 230 at the Shrine. He played around 230 at Texas Tech. Measures in, ends up running in the low 4.5s. I think it was a 4.52 officially. And he in the agility drills, he had a 4.06 shuttle and a 6.9 3-cone drill, which are both like above like upper percentile like agility marks for a running back. And you watch him on tape, I never really had a question about Taj Brooks in terms of his agility, because the way you watch him, he's able to stop start. He's got a
Hmm.
little bit of that patience, a little bit like Le'Veon Bell in terms of letting his blocks like sit and develop, and he'll make guys like just look silly in the open field because of how he can just sink his hips and string moves together in such an effortless fashion. But really, I wanted to see him kind of like hit the speed threshold. Like I was like hoping he would hit under 4.6, because as we've seen with the combine, it's become a little bit faster over the years. They actually had a different material that they were experimenting with this year, which led to a lot of people slipping in a lot of drills, but it seemed to fix a lot of like the inflated speed metrics. But Taj
Hmm.
Brooks ended up, measuring, he ends up running like a 4.52, and I was like, okay, this hits the threshold by a lot more than I thought it would. So I was really impressed with that. I really thought he ran routes extremely well. Like he was doing the drills, like his footwork is pristine. He has such quick feet, being able to navigate through traffic. You could really see it in the bag drills. I think he's a more all-around player, and I just think the fact that he was able to get that speed threshold, like clear it by a long shot, while showing he's an awesome lateral athlete, and maybe showing that maybe he can play at a lighter weight, and maybe it might be more beneficial to his play style. He
Yep.
might open up bigger possibilities. I know some people say like, yeah, Le'Veon Bell became quicker by like, dropping weight. He was always quick, but he wasn't as
Yeah.
fast as he ended up being in the NFL. Maybe that could happen a little bit with Taj Brooks. I don't want to compare them directly, but they do have similarities to how they play. Um, but Brooks, huge winner for me. Checked a ton of boxes. Was really
Yeah.
happy with how he looked.
Yeah, I mean, another guy that I would, we've talked a lot about the depth of this running back class. We'll talk even more about it as we kind of go through this. But Matthew Golden, a guy who I think, like, if he wasn't already, he should be squarely in play at 21 for the Steelers, right? But another guy that we've talked a lot about is Derek Harmon from Oregon.
Yeah,
Man, I was really impressed with what I saw from Harmon. Not just like the testing, like he cleared the 5 second threshold on the 40. I thought he got out of his gate really smoothly, but just like watching him in drills, I thought that he looked really fluid, honestly. And that was one of the question marks kind of that I had about his game, was like the agility and just like the type of mover that he is. Like, I do think that with Harmon, there's a lot to be excited about. Like, he was extremely disruptive as a pass rusher. He was one of the most productive pass rushers on the interior that we had in college football last season. I think he might have led the NCAA in pressures. He has, that kind of club move. He was nearly unstoppable this swim. Like he had a lot of quick wins on film. He does have like a solid first step. And then in the run game, I think that's one of the things that, kind of drew him to the Steelers. Like you look at the way that he is built, man. I mean, this dude is built like an absolute Steeler interior defensive lineman. He's over 6'4". He's like 315 pounds. I
He's
think he
well
played
distributed too. Like
very.
I was noting this a little bit. Like, yeah, he's got some longer legs. He's a little bit higher cut, but like what I
Hmm.
noticed about him compared to like say Dion Walker, Walker's
Oh yeah.
really top heavy, and there's a lot of like difference in density between his upper and his lower half.
Yep.
With Harmon, it's like he's a lot more well distributed. Like he carries that weight extremely well.
Well, you can go just pull up the run game film from both those players and you see it completely. You see why
Yeah,
that's important because, like you mentioned, just like the distribution of the weight. Harmon is much better distributed in like his lower half, and he can actually like hold gaps against the run. And also like the 34 and a half, I think, inch arms as well, like typical like Steelers stuff that they look for. And Harmon's a guy who played like 0 to 5 tech. I think he's going to be more of like a 3 tech defensive end and a 3-4 scheme for the Steelers. I think he's definitely going to be somebody that they spend a lot of time with. They formally met with him. The big thing that I was like just looking to see was like I wish he would have done the agilities. I didn't see agility numbers for him. Did you?
I didn't see agility numbers
Okay.
for him either. There a lot of so actually real quick, I just want to touch on
Yeah.
this. A lot of the reasons why we're not seeing agility times happen anymore is because the event time it got moved down over time, and
Right.
eventually like they players just stopped doing the agilities as much because like it's so late in the night at that point. They might
Hmm.
feel exhausted. They don't feel like they're going to perform at their absolute best. So I totally get why these players wait till their pro day to do the agility testing.
Yeah, for sure. But I do think like when you saw Harmon do the on field stuff, I thought he looked really good. Like
Yes,
the hoop drill was one that I really noted for him. Like it's difficult for a bigger guy to kind of run the hoop and have to go down and pick up the stuff. I thought it was
dropped
really
his hips
fluid.
incredibly well.
Yeah, so I was impressed by that. It kind of made me like want to go back to the tape and like maybe try to see if I like the player. One of the things that I was concerned about was just I thought that he was a little bit stiff at times when it came to like changing directions, and like that's why a lot of those pressures didn't necessarily come into sacks because he would get into the backfield a little bit out of control and he wasn't necessarily able to like change directions and mirror the quarterback's movements. But good player for sure. I think he's going to be a long time starter. It's just really a question about like what the upside is with a player like him. But definitely wanted to shout him out from a Steelers perspective. Who do you got next?
So sticking with the theme of interior defensive linemen, I have Darius Alexander, who has just absolutely been crushing the pre-draft
For sure.
process. 4.95 40-yard dash, 172 unofficial 10-yard split, 31.5-inch vertical. He even did the agilities, like 7.63 cone wasn't too bad. And I just think the fact he's competed and everything he's done, he's just shown that like he is a higher upside type of player than say his age shows. Like he's a guy
Hmm.
who can really move laterally. He's a guy who shows a lot of pop with his hands, like measured in with 34-inch arm length, 82-inch wingspan, I believe. Like that's the type of like measurements you want to see out of a Steelers like defensive lineman. And
Hmm.
just seeing him up close, seeing him be able to do these drills, he just has effortless hip drop for a guy that big. And I was so impressed with how he was moving. The get off is obviously evident on tape, but the fact you're seeing it in testing is even greater to see. He's just checking so many boxes throughout the pre-draft process and just continues to just show that he is an option that everyone in the Steelers organization should be aware of. Like I think this is a guy who can play in the 3 tech, can play the 5 tech. He can be that potential two gapper, and he showed that he could also play at the has a little bit of a wide nine on the edge at times because of how athletic he is, and he can stand
For
up.
sure.
Like there's like that ability to be versatile all across the line. Maybe he might not be like that type of guy who could like slide into the nose tackle like Cam Hayward does. Because let's be real, Cam Hayward's strong as hell in
Right.
terms of how he can handle that. But Alexander showing a lot of versatility, showed off his athleticism, showed that he can win against some of the best throughout the pre-draft process at the Senior Bowl. I'm just so impressed with everything that he's done. And yeah, he's really cementing himself as a just all-around riser throughout the entire pre-draft process.
Yeah, I mean, like part of the reason why I like going to the combine too is just like being it because I had like certain guys I just like love their film and they instantly like prop up to like my guy territory. Like one of those guys
Yeah.
is Boston College edge rusher Donovan Ezaraku. I hope I'm saying his name right, especially after I just called him one of my guys. But um, Ezaraku came in 6'2", 248 pounds. I just really enjoyed like being able to like talk with him, just talking about ball. You know, he was talking a lot about like just like his pass rush plan, the way that he kind of studies for different style rushers or different style blockers, you know, depending on how they like to set their hands, like what set points, aiming points they like to use. But you know this about me, but like I am unashamed to admit it that I always fall for the bendy, like high side rushers. Like it is a love affair that I won't be able to quit. But I love the lower body flexibility that this dude has. He's got multiple moves in the tool belt, goes cross chop, double swipe, probably the best like pass rush repertoire of any rusher in this class. And I really mean that. You know, his footwork is really advanced. I think the big thing that I was looking for was, you know, just what's the next step in terms of like his development. This dude had really long arms, but like he didn't really use them as such in college. And that was one of the things that I thought was notable when talking with him was that he wanted to incorporate like more speed to power. He's got over 34-inch arms, but then, you know, I thought that he was a good athlete on film, but like we mentioned earlier at the top, like if you want to be one of the best pass rushers in the NFL and like really be like a plus starter, you have to be explosive at this position. Like it's a non-negotiable thing. Like if you just go look at all the top pass rushers, especially off the edge, like they are all freak athletes. It just is
Yeah.
what it is with that position. And then you look at how he tested 35.5-inch vert, outstanding. 911 broad, pretty solid. But then like the agility stuff was absolutely phenomenal. It was 4.19 in the shuttle, 6.94 in the three cone. Exactly what I was like hoping to see just to kind of confirm my priors that I wasn't crazy for being so high on this guy. He's going to be a top 25 player for me. Like I said, I still have to watch some offensive linemen that are getting a lot of buzz that could knock him down a little bit. But this is a guy I'm really high on. And I think if the Steelers like needed an edge rusher, this would be the guy I'd be like pounding the table, standing up on the table for.
Yeah, you that was a good shout. Honestly, like in terms of Boston College edge rushers, we've seen like throughout the years, like Harold Landry was a guy, but also like going to a different like college. Like I remember Arnold Ebikete when he was coming out, like he was a shorter, stockier, like edge rusher, but he
Mm-hmm.
had those long arms. And then
Yep.
the fact that Ezuraku has like those 34-inch arm length, like 82.5-inch
Oh
wingspan
yeah, he's a
is
long dude.
insane for a player who is 6'2". The fact you have that natural leverage and you have the length without having the detraction of just like having of being a taller player and having to
Mm-hmm.
consistently keep your pads low. That's such a huge thing that I look for, and those players are so easy to like
I'm
fall
all
in
the
love
way
with.
in. All the
Yeah,
way in.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. We're running a little short on time, but I have a couple more I want to get to, so I'm
Yeah.
gonna kind of go fast on this. Torrey Horton, I was very surprised he ended up testing at all. He ends up doing everything, and he ends up running a really good
Bald.
40 time. He shows a lot of speed. He's a great ball tracker. I'm just so surprised that he was able to recover as well as he was, because like
Mm-hmm.
he had surgery from what I remember reading about his knee. There was not a lot of known a lot known about the extent of that injury, but the fact he was able to show out the go to the combine and show that like he's healthy and he'll be available for the next season, I think that is huge for his draft stock.
Sure.
And obviously, we're going to wait on the medicals in that regard, but I'm very encouraged about that. Tight ends did not have great workouts,
Bad.
but not my tight ends. They all did fine. I swear they all did well. But my guy at tight end throughout this entire process, throughout last year's draft process, has been Terrence Ferguson from Oregon. Absolute freak of nature. Ran in the 4.6s. Showed the ability to drop his hips. Was explosive. Had like a 39-inch vertical for someone who is 6'5", 248 pounds or so. And like he really carries that weight extremely well. He's someone who I think is like one of the higher upside tight ends in this class that hasn't quite tapped into everything yet. And I really think he's just going to keep rising throughout the process. I think he's one of the higher upside tight ends. And I really think a lot of people have been sleeping on him and have not been given him proper respect. I think that's absolutely going to change after he just blew the waters out with how he tested.
Yeah,
And then
and
finally,
you mentioned
oh,
with Horton too. Okay, you got one more? Go ahead.
I have one more, but if
Yeah,
you
go ahead.
Alan add real quick on Horton, I'll listen.
Yeah, no, I think with Horton, I mean, he's only been cleared, I think, for a couple of weeks. That's what DJ was saying on the broadcast. So the fact that he was able to go out there and compete and look the way that he did, test the way he did, with just now being like fully cleared to like actually run and do everything he needed to do was like extremely impressive. I thought that was notable.
Yeah, no, that's huge for his evaluation. And speaking of someone who really made a lot of money, Armand Membu out of Missouri. I had this guy mocked at fourth overall in our first mock draft because I
Mm-hmm.
thought he had one of the clear cut projections out of all the offensive tackles. He ends up having a crazy 40-yard dash. He looks great in the positional drills. He's opening his hips extremely smooth. He's getting a ton of ground out of his sets. There's just a lot that's there on film, and the fact that he's a high testing athlete, the fact that he's got that like shorter leverage and he's got the long arms just is so beneficial for a guy like it's on as an offensive tackle prospect. I really think Membu is just the biggest riser throughout this entire process, and he's going to continue to just keep getting that love throughout the draft process. I wouldn't be shocked if he goes in the top 10, maybe even the top 5.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely a good shout there. Last one that I'll kind of talk through really quick before we move on to kind of like some Steelers specific stuff that we wanted to hit on. Jalen Noel from Iowa State. I thought that he's just really helped himself through the process. You mentioned like guys just coming in and competing every step of the way. Like he had a really good Senior Bowl, was one of the best receivers there, I thought, in my opinion, and then came to the combine, just lit it on fire. He just killed the testing portion of it. 9.48 RAS. Tweeted this out yesterday, but when I watched his film like before the Senior Bowl, I thought that this was kind of the dude that I thought a lot of other people saw in Roman Wilson last year, just in terms of, he's really fast, obviously, but he's also this. He's a more nuanced like route runner. Like he's got the head fakes, the rocker steps at the top of the break to kind of create separation. And I also think like he was just more snappy of a route runner, gets in and out of his breaks. He's better at like being able to decelerate after going full speed and kind of change his tempo, things like that, working back to the quarterback. So I think he's going to go somewhere in the first 2 rounds. Obviously not a guy that the Steelers necessarily are going to look at because they kind of need someone that can play outside. I don't think Noel's film on the outside is very good. Whenever they did put him out there, there are some wins from like a tight condensed split, but just like they already have this archetype of wide receiver. But just thought it was notable. We could go like without mentioning him. I have a couple Steelers specific formals that I kind of wanted to talk about. The first being Alfred Collins from Texas. I thought this was really notable. He was someone that I wanted them to meet with. What a marvel of a man. I mean, 6'5", 332 pounds, over 34 and a half inch arms. Dude, he played up and down the defensive line at Texas along their front. Probably going to be a nose tackle at the next level, which kind of interests me because based on what I heard in Indianapolis, the Steelers are actually really open to moving Keanu Ben to defensive end, which I really like.
Perfect.
You guys know about that.
Perfect.
We've talked about that for a long time. So the worry with these taller defensive linemen is that they kind of struggle with pad level, right? Especially in the run game. Collins does not have that issue. I would actually argue the opposite. I think that this dude plays with the best leverage in the run game, despite being over 6'5", of anybody in this class. It is unimaginable. I have no idea how he does it. But just he can dominate people at the point of attack, man. Like he's really strong. He's dense. Weight is well distributed. He can hold his gap really well. I'm really not sure of like what there is as a pass rusher. Like he tries some stuff. He has this really funny thing that he does in terms of like counters. He's tried to spin a couple times on film, and like the spin that he does, it doesn't actually go anywhere. He just literally rotates in place. It's kind of funny. So like he is a 5th-year guy. He's a little bit of an older prospect. The pass rush stuff is very much a work in progress. But what I do know is that this dude is going to play on first and second down and run downs, goal line, things like that. And he is going to be an absolute hoss. I mean, like if you were to ask me what defensive lineman would you guarantee like plays 8-10 years at the NFL level outside of like the freaks of nature in the first round, I think I want Collins in that discussion just because like I just refuse to believe that this dude's not going to work. I mean, I don't know where you value that because part of me like goes back to it and says like, am I really about to take a early down run specialist in the first 2 rounds? And I'm like, maybe in this class, you could probably convince me that he may be worth that just because it's a weaker draft class overall. So I don't know what NFL teams are going to think of him. I truly don't. I've even like struggled a little bit with like his valuation, but man, is he a good run defender, and I really just enjoy watching him. The one thing he does do extremely well is in the passing game. The dude gets his hand on more
Yeah.
balls than any. He had 6 tip passes last year. I mean, it is a almost innate ability to understand. Like some of the tips were like really impressive too, like outside the pocket, understanding like how to use his length to make quarterbacks try to throw over him. He just altered throwing lanes so much, and I really appreciate it about that because it's like if you're not getting in the backfield consistently, at least you can help us in that regard, get us off the field in third down. So I like Colin's game. I really like him as a fit for the Steelers. I don't know like what that's gonna look like in terms of when he's gonna go. I still think like top 50 love, maybe a little bit too rich, but yeah, he's a freaking good player, man.
It's interesting because they're showing a lot of interest in like early round nose tackles, and I'm kind of
Hmm.
looking at the depth of this class more and more. Like,
Yeah.
not to like go into this, but like CJ West, he had an informal with them, and he's probably one of my favorite day two players in this entire class. He had a great
Yep.
workout. Um, but kind of like getting back on track, like guys that like notable formals that I saw, there was actually mixed reports about this. I wasn't sure if it was informal or formal. People were
Hmm.
reporting a little bit differently on this, but Tate Ratledge, the Georgia guard, which
Okay.
was really surprising, might show that like maybe they're more interested in offensive guards than we think. Like maybe
Yep.
they're not as sold on Mason McCormick. He's actually built a lot like Mason McCormick. Like he's
Yep.
tall, he's angular, he's got a mean streak to him, he's nasty, he's got a great great hair, just absolutely great hair. He's an absolute
Yeah.
joy at the podium from what I was reading, and you know that type of player, he definitely fits like in terms of like what they would want to do. But it's interesting, like, do they want to take an offensive guard that high? Are they really like down on McCormick, or maybe they just want more competition? Are they like potentially worried about Samalu having an age cliff drop off? Like, I
Hmm.
think that's kind of interesting because we've kind of tried to not talk about offensive line as a huge need for them. We've kind of looked at like maybe they need a guy who could be like a swing offensive tackle and into a guard, for depth purposes, because we're not really sure about the future of Broderick Jones and stuff like that. But guard's a little bit uncertain too. So I really found the Tate Ratledge interest to be very like it, an interesting wrinkle to what has been a very like straightforward draft process throughout
Yeah.
this point.
Yeah, it's a good shout. I would just say, like, in terms of interest that the Steelers showed in, I thought, I think you and I definitely expected like they were going to meet with all the top running backs. Like we've just kind of pigeonholed this into like
Yeah.
existence where we know that they're taking a running back. Traditionally, under Mike Tomlin, they've kind of prioritized that early in the draft, right? Like they've really tried to hammer that in the first couple rounds. You think of like first round guys that they've taken under Tomlin, Willie Parker, or not Willie Parker, excuse me, Rashard Mendenhall. Guys like obviously Najee Harris, but then they took Le'Veon in the second round. So like they've taken a lot of like early round backs, but I just thought it was notable that they did meet with like guys that are down people's boards, like not necessarily guys that are going in the first 2 rounds. A couple names that I would like to shout out would be like Jordan James from Oregon.
Yeah.
I was at his podium. I thought he was a pretty solid interview. One thing I thought was cool was like he just kept coming back to like how much he loves outside zone, and we know like that's Arthur Smith's like bread and butter. I also wrote a piece up on him for Steelers Now, but he just kept coming back, loves outside zone, feels like it really showcases like his decisiveness, his vision. One thing I love about James is like he's a smaller dude. Like he came in like 205 pounds, if I remember correctly. This dude just runs behind his pads, man. Like this, this dude
Absolutely.
finishes like he punches above his weight and like he maximizes like all of his abilities. I feel like he's a very like north and south runner. Like he's a no nonsense. I'm gonna get downhill as soon as I possibly can. I felt like the vision was good. I don't necessarily think he's a fantastic athlete. I think the testing kind of like showed that as well. So he's not the most like creative guy. Probably not somebody that I think is going to be like a lead back. But when you look at some similarities at like school, like I think if you're looking for a guy that on day 3 like could come in and potentially like, take carries and do really well. Like Bucky Irving was a guy like last year, didn't test that great out of that same system, came in, played really well with the Bucks behind a good offensive line. I could see like James being like a similar type of contributor like early on in his career, just because I do think that he can do a little bit of everything. He brings the thunder and pass pro. I like that about him as well. So
Reminds me of Kareem Hunt. That's who he
yeah,
reminds me of, just watching
yeah. I
him.
mean, just like in terms of like play style, the way that they run. And another guy that I thought was like kind of interesting because I have no idea what to do with this cat, man. Jaden Blue from Texas. I really
Yeah.
don't. I think opinions on him are going to be like all over the place. When he declared, I couldn't believe it because I mean the dude literally has like 250 touches. I mean there is hardly any film on this cat. I mean he just hasn't played. But he was a junior. He came out early. Um, the thing about Blue is like when you look at his flashes on film, there's two things that you can really get behind. One is the speed. He said he was going to run in the 4.2s. He ended up running 4.4. But like he plays fast. Like you talk about a back that can get to the perimeter, erase angles, like has the really good lower body flexibility. This dude can burn. He's got the jets. And then the receiving ability. I forget like which game. I think it was later in the season, maybe in the playoffs. He ran a really nice like option route where he kind of took it to the pylon in the end zone, like caught the ball, tracked the ball well over his hands. But then like you watch the rest of his film and it's like, he's got some drops mixed in there. I think the vision is like very sketchy. I have no
There's a
idea.
lot of fumbles.
Yeah, he puts the ball on the ground a lot. I mean, I have no idea really what to make of Blue as a prospect, but I do think that it could potentially signal maybe where the Steelers are looking to go with the running back class, that they're not trying to, I guess, like make sure that they have a back by like the first or second round. Maybe they are a little bit more open to like saying, okay, if the board falls this way, can we get a guy in the third, fourth, fifth round that can come in and kind of timeshare with a guy like Jalen Warren, who's going to be back next year? So I just thought it was interesting because I really hadn't considered Blue a ton as like a potential fit for them, just because I do think he's like a real work in progress. But they're definitely trying to touch all the bases as it pertains to the running back class.
Yeah, you mentioned the running back class and like how they're trying to like they met with pretty much like anyone that was
Everybody.
potentially being the first back off the board or potentially like one of the last backs off the board. Like
Hmm.
Kyle Manungai out of Rutgers was one of them. But for me, the one of the most interesting meetings because I'm actually very curious where he's going to go. There was a lot of mixed opinions on this guy. Was Quinshaw Judkins out of Ohio State? Obviously,
Oh
I
yeah.
have him as RB5. I'm pretty high on him in regards to like how I feel his potential prospects at the next level. But I remember like reading about like where people had him and stuff like that, and I don't know if I like misread on Dane Brugler's like top 100, but he wasn't even in his top 100, which I was like, this is kind of crazy to me. I was
Oh
like,
yeah.
Judkins is like got like this huge varying opinion on, and I'm honestly curious to see like where he ends up settling on the Steelers board. Is he potentially the guy that they're higher on than a lot of other people? Because let's be real, there's a lot of violence to how he plays, and that's like the type of style that they like to their backs. And like he's got that potential speed, like he showed it everything at the combine. He tested really well, explosive metrics, the straight line speed 4.48. He solved that question. He said, "I'm gonna do everything," and then he didn't do the agilities.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but I don't blame him too much for that. But I'm really thinking it's gonna be somewhere around like that day 2 to early day 3 range about of where they end up taking a running back. And I think Judkins kind of slides into that area as that type of guy that they'll be looking at. So I found their formal meeting to be interesting with him.
Yeah, and just like two more that I'll quickly point out, like Torrey Horton, they met formally with him. I thought that was interesting. They met with him and Trey Harris from Ole Miss, like bigger guys that could play on the boundary. Not necessarily surprising, but it's good to see like they're kind of prioritizing guys that could play outside because the Steelers have enough slot options for sure. Even like guys that they met with formally, like Golden, like he can play outside. I actually think Golden can play X, Z slot. He can do a little bit of everything for you. A couple other guys that I would kind of like to mention that I really hadn't necessarily thought about in terms of maybe potential Steelers fits. Charles Grant, I think they had a formal with him. So out of
Yeah.
William and Mary, like we talked about guys like come to this combine as like maybe a little bit underrated depending on the school that they, from. This dude has like tree branches for arms. Like the way this dude looks is just like it's unbelievable. I do think that he's a really good mover in terms of like mobility, burst, quickness. He's a guy that can get to the second level, also in pass protection. So he's a tackle from William and Mary, by the way, for like those that maybe aren't familiar with Grant. But he can get to his set points. He can protect the outside shoulder. I do think that the one thing that I've noticed that the Steelers really, really look at in terms of like offensive linemen, especially the guys that they have selected in the past couple drafts, finishing ability, like the
Yeah.
play demeanor, how you work to sustain blocks. Are you going to play through the whistle? Those things like that. I really thought that, Zach Frazier, that was something that really stuck out on his film, but even Mason McCormick, even in times like he struggled, like Frazier and McCormick are going to finish every single play. And I just think that
Yeah.
makes you a really big nuisance to play against. I'm not really sure of like what Grant's stock is, just because I haven't really gone through like all of his film. I've only watched like a game or two so far, but obviously, when you're talking about a guy that's played at William and Mary, you're looking at the competition that he's facing. Speaking of competition, like I watched, we don't have to get into him, but I watched Josh Simmons from Ohio State yesterday. I don't know if I saw him lose a rep. I lost like
Yeah.
three. I watched like 3 or 4 games. He only played like a handful of games last year because then he tore his patella. He's someone that I'm really interested in just like getting medical feedback from Indy, just because like I think his stock could be out the wazoo because he dominated everybody he played against. It's just unfortunate that we didn't get to see more of him. But in terms of like tackles and like just like raw ability, he's as good as pretty much anybody in this class. I would say, other than the only guy that I would think had better tape or like had more wow reps was maybe Mimbu from Missouri. So yeah, just a couple guys. Charles Grant definitely interests me just because.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
Real quick. So you mentioned Josh. You mentioned Josh Simmons. His
Yeah,
teammate at guard, Donovan Jackson, actually.
looked
There's a lot of talk.
great.
There's a lot of talk about him potentially moving to offensive tackle. I think there's a lot of like outside the box thinking that's going on with this tackle class in
Hmm.
terms of like how you want to like order guys, and like they're looking at certain guards and stuff like that. And I think it's really interesting just seeing how this offensive tackle class has kind of evolved in terms of how people are looking at it and like the
Yeah,
guys that they're looking at. So it was a pretty good shot with you though with Charles Grant. I still need to get to him. I'm
and
really interested.
And I think too, like one of the things that in my mock draft that I did last week for Steelers. Now I mocked them a tackle in the 5th round. It was Logan Brown from Kansas, who also like tested really, really well. He has some interesting stuff on film. But I'm just kind of curious in terms of I've just been wondering like what offensive lineman did they add? I think they probably only draft one. Is it a guard? Is it a tackle? I think that could potentially, like when they do it and when they make that investment, could potentially tell us about like what they feel, about their current state of their offensive line. I also like heard there's definitely some rumblings around like Indy. And I think you've like seen some of those things like reach social media as well about like the Steelers are open to like continuing to add along the offensive line and free agency too. So that could be like something that happens like within the first 72 hours of free agency that kind of takes people back a little bit. And they're like, oh, I didn't expect that. But I don't think that, I don't get the sense that they feel like that's a finished product up front in the trenches. And we know that they kind of want to dominate with their bigs and, gotta have the talent to do it for sure. So do you have anybody else you want to shout out?
I think that's about it. In terms of the guys I've been able to shout out. Honestly,
Okay.
like I just want to say this: DJ Giddens, your 4.43 has made me want to go back, has made me go through your film and check every single one of your
Every
on
rep.
runs to see. Yeah, I'm checking every single angle on these defensive backs. I'm like, oh, is he out? Like, how much is he gaining out of his stride here and stuff like that? I'm paying so much attention. So I really appreciate DJ Giddens making me work overtime for trying to figure this out with how he tested.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely appreciate you guys tapping in with us. It was a lot of fun, like recapping Combine Week, one of my favorite weeks of the year for sure. And now, we get back to the film next week. Tentatively, we're going to get into our wide receiver rankings as far as like content that's coming this week for the channel. Planning on getting my free agent wide receivers video out sometime this week. Also, there could be like another like Steelers related pod on the horizon to kind of preview free agency, but that's also like tentative. As well, just like if I can get it scheduled, I might have a special guest that I think you guys will particularly enjoy. So make sure you go follow Nick on social media. Make sure you keep tapping in with his draft stuff as well. We will be back next Monday. Peace and love.